Burgundy 2020 vintage was considered excellent to outstanding by most merchants and critics and reports that came across my desk. I had the good fortune of tasting them just last week at the Pearl of Burgundy tasting. And this is my first look, and it's also a time when you're not tasting it in the cellar, but rather in a hotel condition, very well executed by Pearl of Burgundy team, but it is not in the cellar. So having said that, let me give you my 5 key takeaways from the 2020 vintage. First is that 2020 was another warm year with drought. And this is the 3rd vintage that has been fairly warm since 2018. And this is why we have to look specifically at vineyards to see how they really managed the drought this year. The second takeaway is that Pinot Noir suffered a little bit more and had a bit more inconsistency than Chardonnay, which was harvested a little bit earlier. And the third is that the quality to this vintage really lies in the harvest date and how the vineyards individually manage the drought conditions. And overall, I would say that this is a very good vintage. The reds are juicy and fleshy and ripe and generous, while the whites have surprisingly good acidity. So this is a vintage that really can be enjoyed fairly young, and they're open and even newly bottled, or in Hong Kong, the conditions were that they were actually still from barrels. So barrel samples still are tasting really delicious. So I would say that this overall vintage is one that really we need to look at seriously and to buy. And especially because we also know what the conditions were, the 2021 vintage, which is that it's a very, very small yield. Prices have been going up, that's true, but 2020 is another one of 3, a trilogy of really good vintages. And so with prices rising, if you choose carefully, this is a vintage to buy. So let me tell you the wines that I think did really, really well. So starting from the reds, Domaine Fourier, Domaine Oude-le-Noëlla, Etienne Griveau, Domaine de Monty. For the reds, these are consistently great from the generic Bourgogne all the way to the Grand Cru wines. So I highly recommend these producers. And for the whites, I would say Paul Piot really just impressed me this year, Bernard Moreau, and Michelot. Of course, there are many others that I couldn't taste because I wasn't able to go to Burgundy this year, but I do think that this is a vintage to select carefully, get your guidance from your favorite merchants, and to buy, because prices are only going in one direction. Santé.